Hello everyone, welcome back. Quick announcement before we get into the video. I'm currently running a study that is going to be examining the interacting effects of personality, stress, and coping. If you're interested in participating in that study and helping the advancement of psychological science, please consider checking out the link in the description box below. Today, though, we're going to be talking about something that has gained a lot of my interest over the past year as I've been doing my master's in clinical psychology, and that's going to be the HiTOP system. The HiTOP system is one that I think is really interesting, and it is an alternative essentially to the DSM or our ways of understanding and classifying psychopathologies, but something that I noticed that the world of academia is extremely bad at is social media and presenting information in such a way that the general public is going to be able to make use of it. Like when I looked up high top on YouTube, there's almost nothing. So I thought, I would do my part and maybe do what I can to explain what the high top system is to you all here today, or if you're someone who's interested in learning maybe why we don't really adhere to the DSM that much in the world of clinical psychology compared to, 20, 30 years ago when it was the Bible of psychology. I hear a lot of new students in the psychology field, especially if you're on Reddit or you talk to high schoolers and they're so excited to get their copy of DSM, and then you talk to someone with a few years of experience and it's like, yeah, well, we don't really think of it like that. Like we use the DSM, it helps us in classification, but a lot of the times we are moving towards systems like HiTOP that are going to help us better understand psychopathologies, mental illnesses, and their causes, effects, these sorts of things. So today I'm going to run you through a little bit of what the HiTOP model is and why I like it so much. Let's get into it. So let's start off with just the name. What does HiTOP stand for? It stands for the Hierarchical Taxonomy of Psychopathology, which is a mouthful in my opinion. It's quite the name, but when you start to understand what it is, you'll see why it's called that. And its purpose and the objectives of it are to advance the classification of psychopathology to maximize its usefulness for research and clinical practice. The HiTOP aims to address limitations of traditional nosologies, such as the DSM-5 and ICD-10, including arbitrary boundaries between psychopathology and normality, often unclear boundaries between disorders, frequent disorder co-occurrences, heterogeneity within disorders, and diagnostic instability. Now, if you're not someone who's in the field of psychology or specifically clinical psychology, a lot of that was probably just jumble and it probably didn't make a whole lot of sense. The simple way to think about the high top is that it's a way of classifying psychopathologies that isn't as strict or as categorical as the DSM. When you look at the DSM, you have all these diagnoses and you have all these boxes with specific criteria that needs to be met, and we check off how many of them there are, and then we get a diagnosis from that. This is instead a more continuous way of thinking about psychopathologies, a way to understand them so that we can see not only their roots, but also where they might lead to, what the symptoms of them are. And I think the best way to really think about this is just to take a look at it. So, this is the high top. And when you first take a look at it, it's quite complex. It might seem kind of weird, but it's really not as complex as you think it is. It starts at the top with these things called superspectra, and it moves all the way down to symptoms at the bottom. And it's really, we have the more higher order, conceptual, big groupings of things, categories at the top, where we have the more specific and the narrow down at the bottom. So let's take a look at something like thought disorders. So you can see that it's in the second category of spectra, thought disorders. But then you can move from thought disorders, the spectra, all the way down to the syndromes or disorders, which is schizophrenia, mood disorders or psychosis, schizotypal personality disorder, schizoid and paranoid personality disorder. And you can see that it works the same for all the other ways of classifying disorders and psychopathologies as well. This differs from how we view psychopathologies in the DSM, and that the DSM, yes, there are categories of mental illnesses, like there are chapters in the DSM that represent these categories, but when we look at it through this lens, we really get an idea of what the underlying causes are for some of the psychopathologies. So, say for example, we're looking at someone who has social phobia. Well, we can see that the root cause of that social phobia is actually fear. So, it's actually a fear disorder. And then we can understand that fear disorders are actually a cause of internalizing disorders. So, if we're someone who's in practice or trying to understand someone who has a social phobia, we can actually work our way back through the underlying roots and causes of the disorder that they are experiencing so we can get a better understanding of how to help someone with those struggles, how to help someone who might be experiencing internalizing problems that are expressed through fear that are then more narrowly expressed through social phobias. What I really like about the HiTOP is that it is empirically informed, meaning that we're not just guessing that social phobia is something that is a byproduct of fear, which is a byproduct of internalizing struggles. We know this through empirical support through research, and the HiTOP is continuously being updated as more and more research comes out to support the dimensions that are present in it. And I think that's really one of the greatest strengths of the HiTOP is that as we gain more evidence, it's easy to slot in and change things around to better represent our understandings of psychopathologies and their byproduct symptoms and causes. So I think one of the things that this does so much better than the DSM is talk about causes, is talk about the things that might be leading to the problems that are being expressed. Because, yes, we know that like social phobias are often expressions of some sort of fear or anxiety. But when we really get to the root of it, now we can see that this is, oh, it's an internalizing problem. Or if we move over to externalizing, we can actually see there's different types of externalizing disorders, antagonistic and disinhibited, which both feed into together into something like antisocial behavior, which then feed into ADHD, conduct disorder, antisocial personality disorder. Really, we're getting an idea of the roots and how these roots really influence the trees, essentially, how they connect to each other and how they grow into these disorders. And I think that's what's really important and what's really interesting to me about HiTOP. Now, I do want to mention that HiTOP isn't the only alternative model to the DSM for understanding psychopathology. We also have what's called the research domain of criteria, or RDoC, and there's other ones out there as well. But I personally really like HiTOP, and I'm hoping to be able to have the chance to work with it one day in the future. Let me read a little bit more about the HiTOP from the website so you can get an idea of their mission statement and what they're really trying to do. The HiTOP system aims to significantly advance mental health research and care, providing an effective way to convey information on risk factors, etiology, pathophysiology, phenomenology, illness course, and treatment response, thus greatly improving the utility of the diagnosis of mental disorders. Dimensional measures have been developed to assess many aspects of the system, and several domains of the HiTOP are ready for clinical and research applications. Again, so we have this dimensional approach to understanding disorders, not just exclusively categorical. We're not just saying someone has this one disorder and that's completely separate from all other things in our ways of understanding other separate mental health disorders. We're saying that, okay, this person has, let's say, for example, histrionic personality disorder, but we know that that shares traits in common with narcissistic personality disorder, paranoid personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder because they're both coming from the root cause of antagonistic externalizing. And as we work through psychopathologies and begin to better understand the conceptual links between these things, then we can better treat them. We can better work with people who might be suffering or struggling with these disorders. Another really great thing about the HiTOP model is that it allows us to see the full range of psychopathology struggles that someone might be experiencing, not just one specific category. Now, while someone can be comorbid with diagnostic categories in the DSM, meaning that we can diagnose them with more than one thing at a time, when we're looking at it through this lens, and it's not a category essentially, but it's a combination of different dimensions, we can really get a good idea of things that might be influencing them and their struggles all together. So when I did the HiTOP workshop a few months ago, they had a beta for this HiTOP assessment that kind of measured all of the things that you're seeing on the screen here, and then kind of gave a profile at the end that showed you like the scores and ranges compared to the norms for these things. And what that really allows the clinician or the researcher to see is the full spectrum, the full range of someone's psychological functioning. So let's say someone has enough antisocial behavior to be classified or diagnosed with, I don't know, let's say antisocial personality disorder. Okay, so we know that they're probably really high in antagonistic externalizing. And if we went to just the DSM with that, we might then diagnose them with that and then send them to someone to get help. But when we're doing it like this, we can actually get a full picture of other things that could be present in their psychological profile as well. So we're not just measuring antagonistic externalizing or antisocial behavior so we can see antisocial personality. We're also seeing that, oh, maybe they have that and they have a little bit of, let's say, distress, or maybe they have a little bit of a fear disorder that's presenting through internalizing as well. And what that essentially means is that we can get a more specific treatment plan, a more specific understanding for a client or patient that we might be working with. We can use this to really get that full range picture of that person. And I think that's so much better than the current way that we're doing things with the DSM, where we just kind of give them one category, maybe two categories. With this, we can instead say, okay, so you're high on this variety of features, and that, that might be related to this one specific diagnostic category, but you're also high in this trait that's not part of that category. And we want to make sure that we're treating that or working with you through that struggle as well, so that you can have, better life satisfaction, better psychological functioning. So that's why I really like the HiTOP, and I think it's a great move in the right direction for understanding mental health struggles, psychopathologies, these sorts of things. I think it's really important for us as society, clinicians, researchers to understand that disorders are more than just the presenting symptoms. They're more than just the diagnosis. There's causes that we need to understand. There's relationships with other disorders. There's things that are going to be present outside of that disorder that are going to influence the presentation of that disorder. Like I mentioned earlier, if you have someone who has antisocial personality, but they're also high enough on fear, but maybe not high enough on fear for the diagnosis for another disorder, that's something that we still want to know as a clinician. If we're treating that person, we want to be able to understand how that specific thing is going to present itself in the treatment or the understanding of that person's presentation of their antisocial personality disorder. So having this really nuanced view that gives us hierarchies and tiers of understanding the struggles of the disorders that we're examining is really important in my opinion. Thanks for watching.